Side effects were erythema, burning, and irritation, both groups.
Awkward.
What's the point of not going with oh, this is very very awkward. And I think all right, welcome back everyone to the Chemist Confessions Podcast. I'm Gloria.
I'm Victoria.
And this is a human conversation on all the skincare science we talk about on the daily. And today we have one of those topics that's in the category of, I can't believe we haven't talked about this yet.
Today we are talking about Arbutin.
It's fall. We usually touch on a few things about hyperpigmentation during fall. And I think in a lot of these episodes we'll briefly mention like, oh yeah, hydroquinone is a gold standard. Arbutin is a structural cousin. That's why it gets touted as a hyperpigmentation active. But we've actually never done a deep dive on Arbutin before.
Or hydroquinone.
Yes. So we decided this will be a two-parter. Today we're going to try to address the question whether or not Arbutin can truly be considered as a cosmetic hydroquinone alternative. We're going to kick off with, what is Arbutin?
What is Arbutin? We're going to put the molecules side by side. You'll have Arbutin on the left, hydroquinone on the right. And you can easily see that Arbutin is a distant cousin of hydroquinone. It's a glycosylated derivative. It acts as a tyrosinase inhibitor. The mechanism is, let's just say, it's kind of both controversial and not well understood, but ultimately it is well known as a hyperpigmentation active.
Yeah, this one's a weird one for me because I think Arbutin has a lot of reputation and a lot of talks around, oh, Arbutin is a molecule that has its own merits versus Arbutin is a great active because the sugar molecule actually gets cleaved off and it actually is essentially hydroquinone for your face with a conversion step, kind of like how retinol is to tretinoin kind of relationship. But how that works isn't super well understood, but we did find this really interesting paper that looked at it from a different angle. I think a lot of people think of these conversion steps kind of like retinol. Your skin's own pathways converted into retinoic acid, yada, yada, yada. But they actually looked at Arbutin's conversion into hydroquinone from a microbiome perspective, which I thought was pretty cool. I did find this study from a Korean lab. What they did was pretty interesting and like a very unusual type of study we see on this podcast. What they actually did is they swapped the faces from 26 healthy women volunteers and isolate two of the most abundant bacterial species on face, Staphylococcus epidermidis. You might suspect where they are usually found based on the name, and also Staphylococcus aureus. They also actually purchased these bacteria like meat. So one from organic, I guess, if you will, sources from the face versus lab fresh batches of these bacteria. And then they actually also extracted bacteria, E. coli, and another one from human feces. They didn't specify if it's from the same 26 women or not, but yeah.
Yeah, I think this is super interesting. And I have to say, it's probably the only one that I've come across that has looked at actual microbiome interaction with these actives. We always talk about, every time we touch on microbiome, it's like the application and understanding of microbiome doesn't go very far. But this is the first one that's really looked at, basically looking at microbiome's part in regular cell function. So this is really exciting. I really liked how they did this study. Obviously 26 women is very small, but it's actually a lot of work. It's quite a process for them. So yeah.
We're gonna put the results up here, and what's really interesting is all the bacteria that's studied in this paper did hydrolyze Arbutin into hydroquinone on some level. And I should add that these reactions don't go to completion. So if you look at the y-axis, it's given to you in a rate of nanomoles per minute per milligram of the bacteria solution. What's interesting to me is if you look at the first two bars, that's the bacteria isolated from human skin versus the last two bars, that's the commercial lab-grown versions of these bacteria. Interestingly, the ones on your face seems to be much more efficient at converting Arbutin into hydroquinone than the store-bought ones.
I feel like that opens a can of worms because...
Yeah, I literally just dropped it out there. I have no conclusions to make after that.
Because it really feels like it's like, well, your natural bacteria, even of the same strain, no lab-grown version will be better, and what does that mean for microbiome skincare, our general understanding of microbiome health and research. So huge can of worms that it just made my brain just like spiral out, basically.
Yeah, I mean, literally looking at the study, I'm like, that's so fascinating. What if someone asks us if there's other studies that look at topical bacteria versus topical topical ingredients? It's like, oh no! But I thought this was a fun paper, so I just wanted to share.
No, this is awesome. This is very cool.
Yeah, and in the same study, they also look at arbutin and hydroquinone in assays that look at tyrosinase inhibition, and found that if you look at the chart, the square is hydroquinone and the circle is kojic acid, and the triangle bar all the way at the bottom in the land of sadness is arbutin. So the suggestion here is that arbutin is a tyrosinase inhibitor on its own, but bacterially converting it to hydroquinone adds to its efficacy. So those are some of the ideas behind how it works for hyperpigmentation.
Yeah, and obviously we should also mention that the tyrosinase inhibition chart is from in vitro. So, just keep that in mind. We're going to actually look at arbutin in hopefully a more clinical way in the next section. So hopefully this just at least gives you an idea of how to think about the arbutin mechanism. Honestly, this is not even that, because the mechanism is still, we have to say, is just still not really well tested or well proven that we have a good understanding of it, but definitely a really unique way of thinking about this arena.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, let's look at how arbutin actually compares to hydroquinone. Speaking of hyperpigmentation, did you know that chemical exfoliation is a key step in your overall routine to maximize results? That's right. While hyperpigmentation actives are targeting those complex biological pathways to reduce melanin overproduction, having a good old AHA in your routine clearing away those old dead cells, which makes a huge difference in your results.
And on that note, consider our gold standard exfoliator. With 30% glycolic acid and 5% tranexamic acid, this is our most potent AHA treatment. Use it as a once-a-week rinse-off mask to reveal smoother, more even skin and help all of your other actives work that much better. So if you're curious to try, please use code CCPodcast2024 for 15% off your first order. And for returning customers, don't forget code PodcastShip2024 for free shipping off your next order as well. All right, we're back. Let's actually get into the meats of whether or not arbutin is a worthy hyperpigmentation active.
Yes, so I'm going to come out the gate and say that one of the reasons that we've been avoiding this topic is y'all might have suspected that arbutin data is kind of bleh.
I feel like we're just training people who know us to like read between the lines with our silence.
Yes, exactly. But I will say there's some interesting, there's a few things that's more interesting than I thought. And I will say there's a lot of work done in the in vitro environment. And there's one Japanese in vitro study I want to highlight. Again, this is a little bit more mechanism based. What that translates to in terms of actual performance is a little unknown, but it might be kind of interesting. So in this study, they looked at arbutin and hydroquinone interactions on melanocytes directly. So these are the cells at the bottom of your epidermis that produce your pigmentation. And there are some thoughts. I think there are lines out there that's it's not wholly wrong, but it's a little bit inflammatory. That's like hydroquinone just wipes out your melanocytes. They don't wipe them out, but they do interact with them pretty directly.
Melanocyte genocide? That's terrible.
Yeah, they're like, they just commit genocide on your melanocyte. I'm like, whoa. They don't. They tested it directly on melanocyte cell cultures, and I'm just gonna read their takeaway for you guys real fast. They say the results show that hydroquinone in particular downregulates the early stages of differentiation. Biologically speaking, when melanocytes grow, they grow more fingas, and the more fingas, the more melanin they can shoot up there. So they're saying that basically they prevent melanocytes from reaching that deep maturity stage.
I like how you said shoot up there, but what Gloria means by that is like essentially, producing pigment that moves its way up the skin to see that hyperpigmentation, but just, it's a great visual. Pew!
That is a much better explanation. Thank you very much. Sorry, I digress. And they continue on saying, in which neural crust cells were generated, and the late stage of differentiation in which melanogenesis became active. On the other hand, arbutin had no effect on the differentiation of melanocytes and only suppressed melanogenesis by specifically suppressing elevations in tyrosinase expression in the late stages of differentiation. And even though a lot of times we don't take too much away from in vitro data, but reading this line, I'm like, So you're saying it worked a lot less well than hydroquinone.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. Gloria says absolutely right. Is, in vitro tells you a very, very specific story, a very niche story, but in this sense, it can really help with understanding the mechanism in which it works. And you should refer back to, I forget which pigmentation active episode we covered, but we talked about, like Gloria said, manipulation of the melanocyte tendrils that it has. The less tendrils, the less melanin produced. And in this sense, it's also kind of, they're suggesting, talking about the interference that hydroquinone might play with that interference on top of being a tyrosinase inhibitor. So for anyone that's like getting a little confused, the goal here is just to say that hyperpigmentation actives can have multiple benefits or multiple effects. And in this sense, arbutin truly is just a tyrosinase inhibitor.
Yes, and
that's it.
Hydroquinone may fry your melanocytes, but maybe.
More on that later.
Yes. There's a lot of intro data. I just pulled this one because I thought it's a pretty interesting way of comparing the two.
Sure.
And then of course, as we always do, is like all that like biological pathway talk is interesting. It's fun to look at. But what about clinical topical performance? Yeah. This is where the air just leaves my body. Thankfully, there's a review paper that kind of did most of the dirty work for me. So I'm going to put a little chart up here. Usually we don't put review paper charts up because it's very long and very cumbersome. I'm just going to put the whole chart up here because it's not a big one.
Yeah, I think it never bodes well when review papers have to include studies that test actives in combination with other actives. Like that just tells you that there's just not a lot to work with here. And because that's really not a good clinical to use for review.
And I think that is such a good point. I'm so glad you mentioned it. And this isn't even arbutins paired with something else. We have one where they use it in combination with tranexamic acid 3%, galactomyces ferment filtrate, that is the main component SK2 at 4%, niacinamide at 2%, and then arbutin at 4%. It's like, how not confident are you in arbutin?
I was going to say they've got that 7% arbutin with laser therapy. I just feel like it's the classic case of fetch. They're trying to make fetch work. And
Yeah. So I tried to, there are two studies on this table that look at arbutin in itself. I tried to pull one of them. They looked at 2% arbutin, which is the common percentage you can find in stores. N equals 54 over 8 weeks. Super exciting. Cannot find that paper for the life of me. I can only see a teeny tiny 2-sentence abstract and like, that's it. So we have to turn to the other one. Though I did want to highlight one other study I find to be pretty humorous from this table. In one study, they looked at arbutin at 5% in combination with 10% glycolic acid and 2% kojic acid. They used it for 3 months on 33 females, and they benched it against hydroquinone. Very exciting. And the takeaway is the triple combination was equally effective than hydroquinone, although with more frequent occurrences of side effects. Side effects were erythema, burning, and irritation, both groups.
Awkward.
What's the point of not going with this is very very awkward. And I think shout out to our old kojic acid episode. You guys feel free to check it out. Victoria found a great paper, equally awkward, which is kojic acid can be very irritating, guys.
Yeah. And it's funny because I feel like, people don't think about how there are quite a few actives in the hyperpigmentation realm that can cause irritation. I don't know why. I don't know why that's the case, but maybe it's just because there's a lot of like, other extracts like licorice root or like, all these things. So, but it's definitely a category that definitely takes some finagling. So we'll talk about that more later.
So then I was able to pull the one study that looked at arbutin neat that we can kind of pull something from. So in this paper, they used 1% arbutin versus 1% ellagic acid. And then there's a third cell in the study that looked at 1% ellagic acid with a blend of plant extracts. This is a small study. There's only 10 people in each group. And I will say it's one of those studies that we look at the before after pictures and we're like, this is very awkward. When you put the picture up, this is an age revealing type of picture. Millennials will remember when you used to get your pictures developed at CVS and Costco from your little point and shoots or your little like Kodak rolls. It has a date on the bottom right hand corner.
And we should say this paper was done in 2008. So
they didn't have to go with this camera.
We're not pulling from like the 80s, 90s guys, I promise. Like, oh, Eva. Yeah, and then one other thing to note is they had subjects use these topicals twice daily for 6 months. So I really do like the timeline here because that's truly how long it takes.
So I think the study, there's a lot of goods, there's a lot of myths, but we'll put the results up here. F1 is the 1% Arbutin group, F2 is 1% ellagic, and then group 3 is ellagic plus plant extracts. And this is given in percent reduction from baseline level. And you see that after 6 months, which by the way is a pretty long time, you see roughly around like a 70% reduction. Mm-hmm. Which, how do we feel about that level of results?
Yeah, so I feel like, one, I'm appreciative of a true comparative study, which is, 1% Arbutin to 1% ellagic acid. The other thing is 1% Arbutin, you can get 2%, so I'm also kind of like, I wish they also tested 2%. I know, choosing beggars here. In terms of reduction, this just screams that Arbutin will never be a main hyperpigmentation active. Just simply based on this study, which I know isn't a lot of data, but that's immediately what I think. I'm like, great, secondary active.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much it. The good thing, it is a small study, but in the study, no one experienced any irritation that is very common with hyperpigmentation actives. So in that sense, it is a good, like Victoria says, secondary active that's unlikely to add to whatever issues your skin may have. But yeah, all this to say, this is about it in terms of topical clinical data. And when Arbutin is so commonly positioned as an alternative to hydroquinone, basically our takeaway is hydroquinone alternative, it is not. It hasn't been tested directly against hydroquinone. At least I couldn't find anything where it was. If it is tested against hydroquinone, then it's in an in vitro setting that just highlights how different they are in terms of biomechanisms. So it still doesn't say very much in terms of how it can potentially replace hydroquinone. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that feels satisfying to you guys, especially for those that feel like they suddenly don't have hydroquinone available to them. What we will say is in the next episode, we will be discussing hydroquinone and other actives that have been benched to hydroquinone, and then hopefully be able to provide you guys with at least a good hyperpigmentation routine without it. All that to say is we'll do a deep dive into that subject specifically in the next episode. But yeah, for all the hype that Arbutin has, this is why we always feel very awkward to speak on it, because we just haven't seen all that much just to be so confident to say this is the hydroquinone replacement. So hopefully that gives you guys the true lay of the land.
Yep. So that's it. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to wrap up this episode with some Arbutin product shopping tips. And it's time for the Animal Fun Fact Corner.
Let's do it.
Today we're back in the weird anatomy realm.
Oh no.
We've done weird tongues, we've done weird feetsies, and today it's time for weird hands.
No, not the hands.
So we have to talk very briefly about the eye. Eye-eyes are lemurs that's often dubbed as the ugliest lemur on Earth.
That's horrible. It's so mean.
They've been called the devil's lemur.
Oh my god.
They are not cute, I will say that. I pulled a picture, which I'll put up here. It's about as cute as they come in this picture. They're almost so like quirky looking that they're kind of like ugly adorable. But
I think it's the teeth. Like,
yeah,
you have a very wide face that aggressively narrows into this like snout with teeth. The teeth is throwing me off here.
They also have crazy eyes. Like, I'm sure a lot of you have like an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend that kind of have those eyes at some point. Anyway, the eye is like most lemur. They are only found in Madagascar. The reason I brought them up is they have a very aggressively long middle finger. You kind of see it in the finger, in the picture. It's not just long, it's very, very bony. And we'll link out to the YouTube videos. The way they feed, it obviously it directly ties with how they eat. And the way they feed, if you look at the video, like I can describe it for y'all, but the way they talk about it doesn't do the video justice. Basically, they use their teeth to kind of chomp off some like tree bark and whatnot, and the long finger is used to hook out like bugs and like larvae, things that may be hiding in the tree bark. Literally, like a little fork, if you will, just go in and like finger the food out on their middle finger. Yeah.
Yeah. All our audio listeners, please imagine Gloria just taking her middle finger and dipping downwards. So it's quite entertaining. Anyway,
yeah, they just skewer it right out of the tree hole. But please watch the video if you have a chance, because even the way they chomp off, like just expose the tree holes, is very like the snout that Victoria described.
That's a good word. Tree holes.
Tree hole. The way they dig into it is very aggressive. It is not very nice. Yeah, that's it. That's the II. Oh, I do also want to mention that I couldn't verify this statement, but I found it in one of the videos that talked about the II. They say that IIs in mating, they're as a species, they're very female dominant. Basically the males will duke it out for the right to mate with the female, but the female is like free to mate with multiple males during their mating sessions. Nice. And then they said, and I quote, they're like, during mating, it takes about an hour and the male is not allowed to leave. I was like, whoa, what is happening? But the female IIs apparently get theirs.
So male IIs are held hostage during...
Yes, for at least an hour.
During coitus. Okay, great.
Yes. That's
Jesus. There's a lot. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, all that paired with a face that only a mother could love. It's a lot.
All that paired with a face that looks aggressive, but they're probably not. Like that's a lot. It's pretty intense. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Gloria.
You're welcome. All right, cool. Let's wrap up this episode with some key takeaways and products. We'll say not a ton of super duper interesting data, but the good thing is this category is pretty low stakes for you to try out and see if it's right for your skin type.
Yeah. So we're not going to be telling you that you must have this active in your routine, but there are definitely products out there that are affordable that, like Gloria said, is low risk to add in. So we'll go through 3 products very quickly. So the first product is Inkey's 2% Arbutin, which is an emulsion. Put the IL up on the screen for you guys to take a look. This is relatively vanilla. It truly is just an emulsion with Arbutin. In terms of the second product, we also have Naturium 2% Arbutin. We should note that it also has niacinamide. It does come in at less than our alpha arbutin, or I guess it is listed under alpha arbutin, so it's going to come in at 2% or less, and also includes things like sodium hyaluronate. So just something to keep in mind, especially for hyperpigmentation routines. There's definitely going to be niacinamide in it somewhere, so just keep track of the niacinamide that you have in all of your products. So that's your second option. And the third one is Ordinary's 2% Arbutin with hyaluronic acid. Again, another one with sodium hyaluronate along with alpha arbutin. The price points are pretty similar, so we would say, honestly, you can decide whether you want it in a completely, water-based serum versus an emulsion, and then whether you want niacinamide or not, and that should help you decide which one you should go with.
Yeah, so that really sums it up. I personally would actually probably go with the Naturium one. That's because with niacinamide coming in at a pretty low level, even if you layer something else like a moisturizer with also other low levels of niacinamide, you're probably not overdoing it. I wouldn't recommend it if you already have, say, a 10% niacinamide serum in your routine, but I do think it does, the niacinamide adds value to your hyperpigmentation routine 100%. I personally wouldn't go with the Inkey just because I personally have moisturizers I like already. I don't need to conflate the two in terms of, this gives me arbutin, but it's also moisturizing. So for me, that's just, I think a simple water-based serum will do. And I will say arbutin as a standalone ingredient is fairly stable. So whatever format works for you in your routine, it's mostly okay. Like you don't need to worry too much about it turning on you as you're holding it. In fact, it just usually just turns on your face because of your bacteria.
Yeah, and I think the format point I really like, and I totally agree with you, is any active that you're trying to experiment with, I think ultimately you're going to gravitate towards the water-based version. So I think we talk about this when we talk about plant extracts. A toner format is really easy to incorporate as a test versus an actual emulsion. It complicates generally the formula itself, and then also just your routine, because it's got to come in between other actives. So I really like that top tip. But otherwise, that is it.
Yep. Where can I find this, Victoria?
You can write to us with your burning skincare questions at info@chemistconfessions.com. Please head to our website to check out all of our long form content and guides to things like hyperpigmentation. You can DM us at chemist.confessions, and please check out our polls, which shape each and every one of these episodes. And finally, we are on TikTok. So that's it, guys. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time.
Next time.